So this isn't overly, shall we say, going to be a video where we talk about politics. And like I say, I think this is going to be a good topic because this is something I want to sort of talk about. And of course, it's coming up to Christmas. So I thought, why not? Why not talk about something a little bit different? Why not do something a little bit different? It might be a big experiment. Don't worry, guys. We ain't going to, suddenly become a D&D channel. But often in the past, we have talked about businesses and the fact that they are, in many ways, either making really bad business decisions, like we talked about the D&D change for the OG, like the original game license, which certainly has been one of the biggest missteps that they have had. But this year, and especially 2023, and not just this year, but next year, 2024, is going to be D&D's 50th anniversary. So if you think you've got this product, which is having its 50th year anniversary, which for many products and businesses would be a monumental point of celebration, but we're going into 2024 where they'll be celebrating this, or is meant to be celebrating this, and yet the community around D&D has monumentally not only turned against Wizards, but turned against Hasbro, the owning parent company who owns the D&D sort of license. You've had probably two massive, big sort of multimedia successes in sort of the film and sort of Baldur's Gate 3. But going into 2024, when it should be this monumental, massive milestone, and remember, you only get one 50th anniversary, and yet it really doesn't feel like 2024 is going to be as big as it should be because of the monumental missteps and mistakes I think that its parent company and Wizards have made in running the D&D license. So we're going to have a talk about what it's been like this year for not only someone who is, again, a big fan of D&D. Like I say, I have all these books next to me here, just D&D books. But yeah, it's been an odd year, very odd year for D&D, and I worry about its future. Maybe not, shall we say, will D&D continue? Will it die out? But is D&D going to be owned by Hasbro in the foreseeable future? I think that's the bigger question a lot of us really should be asking. So before we go talking more about this and sort of what happened and why now there is such a negative opinion of sort of Wizards and Hasbro going into 2024, when again, you've got a milestone anniversary, and yet when your audience should be really pumped up, really excited going into what should be a massive milestone anniversary, I don't know many people in the D&D community who are honestly that excited about it being D&D's 50th anniversary. And that is partly down to, I think, Wizards of the Coast and, of course, Hasbro as well. So let's talk about what happened. But before we do that, please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And, of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And, of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. And don't worry, like I say, I'm just having a day off today. But yes, don't worry, we will be talking about politics, so don't worry. So ultimately, what really happened this year? So first of all, starting at the beginning of sort of 2023, you had a big film release in D&D Honor Among Thieves. Now, to be honest, it wasn't actually that bad a bad movie, considering the fact that, if you saw the original Dungeons and Dragons movie with Jeremy Irons, and you're like, wow, I'm surprised there was any scenery left after, the amount of scenery chewing or eating that suddenly he engaged in. Kind of spectacular. But the idea that we actually got a good movie and it had some sort of quite a big cultural impact this year that people were really talking about a D&D movie. And then this went on for more people to talk about, well, how about a D&D TV show? And all these ideas of multimedia properties, which again, if you are Hasbro, you should be absolutely salivating at the thought of getting these projects up and running off the ground. And yet, because of what happened next, you had the whole original game license where Hasbro was now going to start sort of charging sort of creators who came up with sort of ideas to sort of supplement sort of D&D and sort of publish their own books and the original game open game license. That turned a very creative community in against almost its core product to a point where you had Critical Role, easily one of the most known, if not gateway, almost entry points for people to get into D&D, decided that they would go and make their own gaming system. And not just them, a number of other companies that relied and published like supplemental material, Cobalt Press, Hit Point Press. There are others I can't think of the top of my head at the moment, but all these companies suddenly went, we're rethinking our future, continuing with like D&D content. Now, ultimately, there would be a back step, a back pedal, and sort of a return ish to the OG license. But a lot of the goodwill that Hasbro had got from 5th edition, that is almost practically spent at this point. And then, of course, you've got to remember this is a really creative community. And if you've been following, especially this year, the whole debate in creative communities about how or should AI art be um, accepted or not? Can it be used as a tool in artist communities? Maybe if you've done something and then you've maybe used AI to sort of touch it up. There's big debates around the artistic community as to whether or not um, AI, should be even allowed or even considered a thing. And yet, D&D had its own massive scandal when people noticed that one of their books that got put out was using AI generated art. And this started a big discussion about creatives. Are they just now going to stop using creatives and just start using AI generated art? That was another monumental moment of that, which again, from what we can see, maybe they were at some point. Well, they talked about the fact that maybe this art had gotten there by accident, but a lot of people generally didn't believe it. This caused, especially after the whole OG license stuff. So remember, this all came after that. Um, the next book that was going to be published after, I think it was The Glory of the Giants, got massively delayed, and people suspect that there was potentially more artwork in there that had been AI generated. That lost a lot of community support as well. And then, of course, you had Baldur's Gate 3. And if you've been, if you are in any sort of gaming sphere, anything like that, Baldur's Gate 3 has just pretty much swept the awards for Game of the Year. And I'm not surprised if that would also be another entry for people now wanting to get into, play D&D. Just like if people see Critical Role, they went, oh, I want to play D&D. Or they play Baldur's Gate. Oh, wow, I've really enjoyed Baldur's Gate 3. I want to go play, what it's based on. I want to go play D&D. So there should be at least a monumental groundswell, as we said, going into 2024, with it being the 50th, not only the 50th anniversary of D&D, but with the supposed now release, or at least we think it's going to be next year, of, well, I suppose what people are calling 6th edition of D&D. And that in itself is going to be a massive release. But because of all the recently Hasbro laid off over 1,000 workers, and most of it came from Wizards of the Coast. Most of it was from Wizards of the Coast, and even Larian Studios, the people who made D&D, came out and said, yeah, most of the people who greenlit, who contributed story ideas and other stuff to sort of the game, they're no longer working at Wizards. So the entire people who greenlit probably one of the biggest multimedia successes of the license of Dungeons and Dragons, no longer there. And ultimately, I think that there's two things really going on here, because it's not just those things that have sort of affected D&D. I think D&D sales have been sort of relatively steady. I think they lost a lot of momentum maybe in like the third quarter because of the OG license stuff and the AI art stuff that went on. But from what we've been able to see, they've been at least steady-ish. They have lost money, but it hasn't been monumental losses from D&D. What has been the big loss, I think, maybe what actually might be driving this more is the fact that if you know any card game players out there, Magic the Gathering this year has been, well, for the past 2 years, has been going through monumental fan backlash with increased pressure from different sort of card games. Not only do you have sort of Flesh and Blood, trying to sort of edge it out and sort of capture that exact same audience. You've had the Lorcana release as well, from a Disney point of perspective, a playing a trading card game that is very, very sort of similar, made by one of the people behind Magic the Gathering themselves from Wizards. I think maybe we'll never sort of truly know sort of the exact business reasons and the thinking behind this. But it does seem to me that a lot of the losses and the reason for the job losses seem to have more come because of Wizards have just completely mismanaged Magic the Gathering, and of course that has ultimately gone into effect D&D. Maybe that's why those job losses hit there, especially. It could also be reducing the size of the D&D staff as well. We may never know sort of the full reason, the business reasoning behind all that. But that's been sort of 2023 for D&D. It's been an odd year of where going into 2023, Wizards had so much player capital and respect from D&D, and yet that is now gone. And if we do go into next year and we do get 6th edition, it's going to be interesting to see what numbers that does and how well 6th edition sells, especially when we know that a lot of this stuff is trying to be tied to digital assets online. I'll tell you this now, it is a big grand experiment I think that's being planned with sort of trying to sort of digitize more and more D&D, which again has had a lot of creatives worried this year from what we saw from the changes to the OG, the original the open gaming license be published. So who knows? But I tell you this now, D&D by itself, if you separate it from Wizards, if you separate it from Hasbro, just as a name and a licensable material, has so much street cred, so valuable just in that name alone. D&D will survive if Wizards go under or Hasbro decides to sell off the license. It will survive. It will continue, just under a different name, under a different company, because it's a far too valuable brand for it to shall we say, just die on the vine and shrivel on the vine. That is very unlikely to happen. But It would be very, very monumentally upsetting to see a game going into its 50th year, celebrating that, and then being sold off, or at least for all intents and appearances, appearing to die. And I think that would be a huge monumental misstep, not only for Hasbro, but also Wizards as well. And who knows? Maybe we'll get more insider information after all, and what's going on in the company. But I have a lot of reason to suspect that it isn't um, D&D that is responsible for a lot of these layoffs. I think it might be Magic the Gathering that has been ultimately maybe responsible for some of these layoffs. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. Like I say, we may never really know the full extent of the truth unless several insiders come out and say, actually, this is what happened, which maybe we might get in the near future. But who knows? All I can hope is that at least 2024 is a far, far better for D&D. And I'll tell you this now, if you are a D&D player and you are worried about D&D, just like me going into next year, well, like I say, don't worry. There's plenty of other systems out there. Pathfinder in particular, very, very much a sort of a D&D successor, even at one point beating out D&D, if you remember a couple of years ago before 5th edition. So there are other games out there, and I would encourage you to sort of broaden your horizons, go and try them. There's Cyberpunk, there's Shadowrunner, there's Call of Cthulhu, there's Phoenix, there's a ton of different tabletop RPGs out there you can try, and I would encourage people to sort of go out and try them and try all the different flavors there are out there, and see what you like. Maybe you like a new one. Maybe you like something a bit more sort of complex. Maybe you want something sort of that's easy to get into. Something like D&D 5th edition was designed to sort of get new players in. There's plenty of other games out there for you to try, and like I say, should D&D sort of go from Hasbro, or Hasbro lets go of D&D, it will survive. It's a strong enough brand for it to survive under someone else. And well, we'll see what happens in that regard. But yeah, so hopefully next year it will be a far more better year for D&D. But I'll tell you what, they've got a lot of work to redo to regain community trust. A lot of work. So as always, thank you very much. And of course, we'll see you all next time.